Okay, welcome back to Advanced Composition with Professor Kent Lee. We're going to talk a little bit about some other types of professional and academic writing. So a conference abstract or proposal, I mentioned that before, these are in the beginning, some of these are listed at the beginning of section 12.1. If you are going to graduate school, you will need to produce some research and probably present it at conferences, especially for PhD, and especially if you want to do an academic or research job in the future. These are kind of similar. An abstract is written as if you've already done it and you've got at least preliminary results. And often what you present at a conference is preliminary, maybe your initial results. Or proposal is written more like you're going to do this, and this is what I expect to find, or something like that. But they're kind of similar. It's usually about 1 or 2 paragraphs when you submit to a conference. So a master's thesis, I talked about this before, can be your very first kind of baby steps into doing actual research, and a massive research write-up of 30 to 80 pages. And after doing one of those, hopefully you're ready to do a PhD dissertation, which is a full-fledged research project, much bigger write-up. It's maybe 100 pages. Sometimes in science and engineering, a little bit shorter, about 100 pages, to maybe 100 or 200 pages in social sciences, maybe 300. In humanities could easily get longer, hopefully not more than 500, but some people have done longer. But I wouldn't recommend it. No reason to destroy yourself and suck out your soul in your all pleasure in life writing a massive dissertation. Anyway, let's talk about teaching statements. Some of you might go into teaching jobs at different levels, from secondary to college and or such. They might ask you to write a teaching statement. What do you do? Well, and they might even call it a teaching philosophy statement in some places. And I happen to have some materials on that. I can refer you to my website. I'll have some materials on some of these other genres I'm talking about in this video segment. So put them on the website. You may have to click a little thing that says expanded to expand it, so that not everyone is overwhelmed by all of this stuff on my website. So a teaching statement, you're going to explain your teaching experience, your background in teaching, and your strengths as a teacher. What have you learned as a teacher? How have you developed as a teacher? Talk about your teaching methods, or your beliefs in teaching and teaching methods. And give examples. Always give specific examples, especially if it comes to how would you teach something that's usually kind of hard to teach. So if you're applying for a job as a biology teacher, and explain your teaching method, your beliefs about teaching methods. Is it just you lecturing? Hopefully not. Hopefully you're going to talk about how you believe in doing some hands-on experience and some group activities, some problem solving and challenge type tasks to help students learn in groups and learn on their own. And give an example of how you would explain something maybe that's really important or really challenging to teach. Like you want to explain how DNA repair and how the body repairs damaged DNA. And it's probably a hard thing to teach. A little complicated, and students have trouble learning that. So explain what's your really cool, novel technique for teaching that. Explain that. Or you're teaching German, and students always have trouble with like the adjective endings and article endings in German, die, das, and such. Some people have trouble teaching that. How would you teach it? What's your really cool way of teaching it that's effective, that really works? Now, think about your beliefs about teaching. There's often a disconnect between what people say. This is what I believe about teaching. This is my belief about teaching. I believe in language teaching that's communicative and interactive. but when it comes to actual practice, they don't quite know how to do it. When they've learned maybe in teacher training classes or language education training classes about the value of maybe interactive and communicative language teaching, but this person has never personally experienced it very much. So that person then gets a teaching job and they say, I believe in interactive and communicative teaching, but in the actual classroom, they don't really quite know how to do it. Maybe they had some workshops or some lessons on how to do it, but it was kind of superficial and it wasn't really enough to really help them to teach everything that way. They don't know. So they fall back on what they're familiar with. And in high school and college, they were taught by, a language teacher lecturing them and talking to them and doing kind of traditional language exchange techniques between the teacher and the students. So they fall back on what they are familiar with. So there is a disconnect oftentimes between what people say, this is what I believe as a teacher, and what they actually do in the classroom. So what you might want to do is look online. I might have it on my website, I'm not sure. Look for something on teaching philosophy inventory. So an inventory is like a psychological test or an education test where you answer questions and then it kind of classifies you into a certain category. So there are teaching philosophy inventories, and I might have a link on my website later. And what this does is it kind of gets beyond what you think your teaching philosophy or methods, methodologies are, and what you actually would do in a classroom. And it can be really informative, really insightful, a way of kind of learning about yourself. Because you say, oh, I believe in communicative teaching, but according to the answers to the questions, you're a very traditional kind of teacher. And that can really help you to understand what your teaching beliefs are. Deep down, what are your teaching beliefs? And the principles that would guide your actual classroom teaching. And then based on that, you can then think about how you would, what are the strengths of that, about that, but then how can I change? How can I actually learn from some of the other teaching approaches? It's a way of examining yourself. And then you can include that in your teaching statement. When you write up your teaching statement to apply for a teaching job, you can then say, you might not want to use some of the terminology from the teaching inventory because the people reading your application may not know some of the terminology. You're a behaviorist teacher, and that doesn't sound good. But you can reflect on the results of your teaching philosophy survey and some of the questions involved in the survey and use that. Well, I believe in a more progressive kind of or modern way of teaching because maybe I don't want to use the lingo from the inventory, but maybe I want to say I like to use a more modern, up-to-date approach that involves such and such, and drawing from some of the items from the inventory, some of the questions that you answered, and give examples. Or I want to be more progressive and I'm trying to change this way. I realize I need to be kind of more modern or updated or less traditional, or I'm traditional in these ways and I think these are strengths, but I'm trying to change in this way. So you're reflecting on your growth somehow. And those are some ideas. A teaching philosophy inventory can maybe help you think about your teaching methods, and you can draw from that in writing up your teaching statement. And again, I've got examples online, I think, of teaching statements too, that you can follow and draw from, as well as a teaching inventory. Research statement or research plan. For example, you're applying for an academic job as a professor. You might be asked to submit a teaching statement and or a research statement. And a research statement is going to be kind of like a teaching statement. It's going to explain your past research experience, your research skills and qualifications, what you've got experience in, some of your accomplishments, key accomplishments. And then if given the job here at this university, what would you do? Kind of outline kind of a plan. What research are you going to, what particular projects are you going to do in the next 2 years and 5 years and why? What do you expect to find? Where do you expect to publish it? So kind of an outline of what research you want to do and why. Now, some other kind of things to be aware of. Maybe you at least should know this terminology. You might know friends who go in this direction. Postdoc or postdoctoral research. If you are in certain fields like psychology or engineering, and if you want to get an academic job as a professor, it's not enough to get a PhD. And it sounds depressing, huh? What? You need something more beyond a PhD? Oh my God, what could that be? Well, it's a postdoc, postdoctoral research. So you did a PhD and you did research on one topic. And in order to be a little bit broader in your intellectual and research abilities, you may be expected to do postdoc and do a slightly different research project to kind of broaden yourself research-wise and intellectually. So maybe one guy works on particular kind of laser, developing a particular new kind of laser for his PhD research in engineering, but then he's going to do a postdoc where he works on maybe semiconductors using a similar material or a different kind of laser or different application of laser. Maybe he did just laboratory research on a new kind of laser that can, shoot holes in metal, but then he's going to do a postdoc in another kind of use of lasers for biomedical purposes. Or somebody does a psychology PhD focusing on one particular kind of cognitive research, and they're going to move to a postdoc and do something slightly different. So it's kind of develop your research skills. And oftentimes that's expected in order to get a job as a professor. So you should at least know what a postdoc is. It stands for postdoctoral research. So basically you're there as a researcher in a laboratory, working with a professor. You've got a PhD, but you're working with a different professor, maybe at a different university, and doing a different kind of research, and then get some publications. And after you worked as a postdoc for 1 year, 2 years, hopefully not too much longer than that, and you can then maybe apply for a professorship because those fields are pretty competitive. Unfortunately, there's kind of a bad academic job market in the US, and I've heard of some people in psychology fields getting stuck in postdocs for like 5 years, 10 years, not able to get a professor job. Sad. Maybe time to move to private industry. Better money there. Okay, some other things. If you are doing a PhD, to apply for a postdoc, you're probably going to write up a research proposal. It's kind of a proposal. So a research proposal is going to have a lit review, kind of a review of the research, past research on a very specific topic, and then what you want to do. You're going to propose research you want to do in that lab as a postdoc, and expected outcomes. And along with that, something similar is a grant proposal. If you're a postdoc or if you're a PhD student, especially in science field, psychology, you need to write a research grant, or 2 or 3 or more. So it's going to have kind of a brief lit review, but again, you're probably the people reading this research grant, maybe one of them knows your field, but probably the others on the committee reading your research grant who make the decision, they may be from a different field, maybe a related field or a very different field, who knows. So you kind of have to explain the research you want to do to people who may not know much about your particular research area. And you have to make a better case for why your research is important. Why should we fund you? What do you expect the results to be, and how could it be useful? What are possible applications or importance of your research? Why is it important? So you're going to have a research proposal, lit review, your hypothesis, your research proposal, and a budget and a timeline. This is kind of like the timeline. It's going to take 2 years and expected to go like this and this and this. And then a budget. You need to say, break a rough budget. I'm going to spend $1,000 for this and $5,000 for this and so on. As a professor, you may apply for grants too, of course. And again, anytime you're writing some of these documents, be careful. I made one mistake. I applied when I was doing my PhD. I applied for a few research grants. I got one. I got a small research grant. I applied for a big research grant from a government agency that funds science and social science research. But I made a mistake. In trying to persuade people about the value of my research, of course, I talked about how there are these two competing theories about how something happens. I'll spare you the details, but there are these two different competing theories, and I expect my research to support this theory, this hypothesis. And that was a mistake. I shouldn't have committed to one particular hypothesis, one particular outcome. I should have just said, this might help us understand, is this one or this one correct or better or such? Because one of the persons on the committee reviewing my research was apparently from the other side. So I'm basically saying, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that was a mistake. And that person didn't like my research grant and he rejected it. And then other two people on the committee, other two people who were reading this, and they were from different universities in the US. The other two they were not really appropriate reviewers. They didn't understand my research, and they asked really stupid questions or gave really stupid feedback. Like, why didn't you do this? I'm like, didn't you listen to anything I wrote? Come on. They weren't qualified really. And that happens sometimes. People reviewed your research proposal, your grant, like a government grant, and the government agency sends it out to some professor at a really different university who may not know enough about your research field, your field in general, and they say no for the wrong reasons. So I overcommitted to one hypothesis, and I should have been more balanced. And what I found actually was my results, and eventually kind of indicated it was a mixture of both. It was a mixture of both, and I made a mistake of saying I'm going to try to show this is right, and that was not good. It was a mixture of really two slightly different things going on. Mistake. So be careful. Anytime you write an SOP, a research proposal, a research grant, and the people making these decisions may believe in different theories or hypotheses, be careful. Don't commit yourself too much to one. My advice. All right, next time. Oh, in the next segment, we are going to start getting into some grammar and style issues again. So you will need to refer to my course packet in PDF. All right, so there will be some extra links on the website for some of these other kinds of documents that I've talked about here. So you can look at those. See you later.